The sound was deafening. It wasn't just a baby crying. It was a full-bodied scream that cut through the pressurized air of the plane like a siren. The kind of cry that sent shivers down spines, that made every passenger wince involuntarily, that made conversation stop mid-sentence. The baby's tiny lungs seemed far too powerful for such a small body, but there was no mistaking it. This little one was unhappy, and everyone within earshot was going to know it. The Airbus A350 had just leveled off, cruising smoothly above the clouds. The seatbelt sign had dinged off, and the cabin crew was preparing for the first beverage service. It should have been a calm, uneventful flight. Instead, it felt like the entire plane was being held hostage by a single passenger, an infant no more than 8 months old. People shifted in their seats, groaning under their breath. One businessman in a Navy suit shoved earbuds deeper into his ears, cranking up the volume of his noise-canceling headphones. A young woman across the aisle pulled her blanket over her head, trying to drown out the shrill wails. Even the flight attendants, trained to remain composed in all situations, exchanged helpless glances as they passed each other in the aisle. And there, in the first row of first class, sat the baby's father, Lucas Sterling, one of the most well-known names in the business world. Normally, Lucas looked the part of a billionaire, polished, confident, untouchable. But at this moment, he looked nothing like the face you saw on magazine covers or business channels. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his shirt collar open, and his expression was one of pure, unfiltered exhaustion. Lucas shifted the baby from one shoulder to the other, whispering soothing words into her tiny ear. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here, H." His voice was low, gentle, and full of desperation. But nothing worked. The little girl's face was red from crying, her small fists clenched, her legs kicking with frustration. Nearby passengers watched with a mix of pity and irritation. A woman in seat 2B, dripping in gold jewelry, let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, as though Lucas's failure to calm his child was a personal insult to her luxury travel experience. Another passenger muttered something about kids in first class, under his breath, loud enough for Lucas to hear. Lucas felt the sting of their judgment. Being a billionaire never protected him from moments like this. Right now, he wasn't the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a man whose decisions could move markets. He was just a father, utterly powerless in the face of his daughter's tears. The sound of the crying filled every corner of the aircraft, seeping past the curtains that separated first class from business, traveling all the way back to economy. Parents of other children instinctively reached for pacifiers or sippy cups, checking their own kids to make sure they weren't about to join the symphony. Couples traveling for vacation exchanged looks of dread, already fearing this might be a long, sleepless flight. A flight attendant approached Lucas, her face kind but strained. "Sir," she said softly, "do you need any assistance? We have some baby formula on board, or perhaps a pacifier." Lucas shook his head. "She won't take it," he said, sounding defeated. "I've tried everything." He had, in fact, been trying since the moment they boarded. Even during takeoff, when most babies are distracted by the new sensations, his daughter had started crying and hadn't stopped. He had rocked her, bounced her, offered milk, sung lullabies, even paced back and forth in the narrow first-class cabin until the flight attendants had to politely ask him to sit down. Now, 40 minutes into flight, his arms were tired, his shirt was damp with sweat, and his nerves were fraying. He kissed the top of his baby's head, feeling the soft tufts of her hair, and silently prayed she would calm down soon. The crying grew louder. Somewhere behind him, someone groaned audibly. A man's irritated voice rose above the noise. "Can someone shut that baby up already?" Lucas stiffened. His protective instincts flared, but he swallowed the retort forming in his throat. There was no point in arguing. They didn't understand. They couldn't. This was his first trip alone with his daughter, since his wife had passed away. He was still learning how to be both father and mother, still trying to figure out what comforted her and what didn't. He thought about canceling this trip a dozen times, but the board meeting in London was too important, and there was no one else he trusted to care for his baby while he was away. So here he was, thousands of feet above the ground, trapped in a metal tube, feeling every ounce of the world's judgment pressing down on him. The baby let out another ear-piercing scream, and Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. He wasn't angry at her. He could never be angry at her. But the helplessness was eating him alive. The plane felt smaller with every minute that passed. The air was thick with tension, with whispers, with sighs. It was the kind of atmosphere that could turn a flight from ordinary to unbearable. People were already pulling out their phones, probably to tweet about the screaming baby in first class and the incompetent dad who couldn't handle it. Lucas adjusted his hold on his daughter, rocking her gently as tears pricked his own eyes. He refused to let them fall. He couldn't break down here, not in front of strangers, not when his baby needed him to be strong. But deep down, he feared the worst. What if she cried like this the entire flight? What if there was nothing he could do to make it stop? What if every person on this plane secretly hated them both by the time they landed? It was a father's nightmare. And Lucas Sterling, a man who had faced billion-dollar deals and hostile takeovers, had never felt so completely out of control. Lucas Sterling had been called many things in his life: genius, ruthless negotiator, industry titan, even the man who doesn't sleep by financial journalists. But tonight, somewhere 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, he felt like none of those things. He felt human, painfully human. Lucas sat back in the wide leather first-class seat, his baby girl still wailing in his arms. His normally perfect posture was gone. He slumped forward, hair falling into his face, dark circles under his eyes betraying just how little rest he'd had lately. He was used to being in control of everything. He controlled boardrooms. He controlled billion-dollar mergers. He controlled the narrative whenever his company made headlines. But here, in this plane, in this moment, he had no control whatsoever. His mind wandered as he tried to rock his daughter gently, hoping she might calm down. He thought about the last few months, about how fast his life had changed. Just half a year ago, Lucas had been living the life most men could only dream of. A beautiful wife, a thriving business empire, private jets, luxury homes in 3 countries. Everything was perfect until one rainy evening changed everything. His wife, Anna, was gone in an instant. A car accident that shattered his heart and left him a single father overnight. Now his daughter, Lily, was all he had left of her. The little girl with Anna's warm brown eyes and Lucas's stubborn chin. She was his world. And yet, he still felt like he was learning who she was, what made her smile, what made her cry. The trip had been a hard decision. Lucas almost canceled it 3 separate times, but his executive team had begged him not to. There were crucial meetings with investors in London, deals that could change the future of his company. And as always, Lucas had put responsibility first. But that didn't mean he wasn't paying the price now. He glanced down at Lily, her little face contorted in distress. Was she hungry? No. She had eaten before they boarded. Was it her ears? The pressure from takeoff sometimes hurt babies. He had tried giving her a bottle during ascent to help, but she had refused it, turning her head away stubbornly. Lucas sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand. He could feel the tension building between his shoulders, that familiar knot that came whenever he felt trapped in a situation he couldn't control. Across the aisle, a flight attendant knelt beside his seat. "Mr. Sterling, would you like me to prepare a warm bottle? We have formula in the galley." Lucas offered her a weary smile. "Thank you, but she doesn't take formula very well. I've tried." The flight attendant nodded sympathetically, but Lucas could see the concern in her eyes. She wanted to help, but there was only so much she could do. The other passengers, however, weren't nearly as sympathetic. The man in 1B leaned his head against a window, muttering something under his breath about people traveling with infants. A woman 2 rows back was giving Lucas the kind of look that said she thought his money should have bought him a private jet for situations like this. Normally, Lucas would have ignored them. He had endured criticism his entire career, tabloids, online trolls, competitors. But this was different. This wasn't about business. This was about his daughter, about his ability to be the kind of father she needed. And right now, he felt like he was failing. He thought about Anna again, about how effortlessly she used to soothe Lily. She had this way of humming softly while swaying side to side, and Lily would go quiet within minutes. Lucas had tried to imitate it more than once, but he never quite got it right. He wasn't sure if it was a melody or simply Anna's presence that had calmed their baby. He felt a lump rise in his throat. If Anna were here, this wouldn't be happening. If Anna were here, Lily wouldn't be crying like this. Lucas blinked rapidly, forcing back tears. He had promised himself he wouldn't break down in public, not in front of strangers, not while everyone was already judging him. He glanced around the cabin, searching for answers, for anything that might distract Lily long enough to calm her. A colorful blanket, a toy, something. But first-class cabins were minimalist, just leather, polished wood, and quiet luxury. There was nothing for a baby to look at except the tired, annoyed faces of strangers. Lily let out another scream, louder this time. Lucas kissed the top of her head and whispered, "It's okay, baby girl. I know you're upset. Daddy's trying." But the words felt hollow even to him. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Lucas had been going nonstop since Anna's funeral, juggling his company, his daughter, and the constant pressure of living under a microscope. Nights like this made him wonder if he was cut out for this at all. He could feel sweat forming at his temples. His expensive shirt clung to his back. His arms ached from holding Lily for so long. He wanted to stand and pace the aisle, but he knew it would disturb even more people, and some were already giving him looks that could cut glass. For the first time in years, Lucas felt something close to panic. What if Lily screamed like this for the entire 7-hour flight? What if she exhausted herself into a fever? What if the crew had to make an emergency landing because other passengers complained too much? It sounded dramatic, but Lucas had been in enough extreme situations to know that human patience had limits. And judging by the faces he saw around him, many of those limits were close to being reached. One passenger caught his eye. She was sitting much further back, somewhere near the economy section, but she wasn't glaring at him. In fact, she looked concerned. Her face was soft, her eyes gentle, almost as if she wanted to help but wasn't sure she should. Lucas quickly looked away, focusing back on Lily. He didn't have the energy to make eye contact with strangers right now. He tried once more to rock Lily into silence, humming softly under his breath. But his voice cracked, and it came out rough, tired. It was the sound of a man at the end of his rope. Lucas closed his eyes, his forehead resting briefly against Lily's. "Please," he whispered, so quietly no one else could hear. "Please stop crying, just for a little while." It wasn't just a plea to his daughter. It was a plea to the universe, to Anna, to anyone who might be listening. Somewhere deep down, Lucas knew he couldn't do this alone forever. But right now, he had no choice. Right now, all he could do was keep holding his daughter and hope that somehow, miraculously, things would get better. The longer the baby cried, the more the cabin seemed to shrink. The noise wasn't just loud anymore, it was relentless. Each sharp wail seemed to rattle the tray tables and vibrate through the seats. What had started as scattered glances from passengers was now a storm of irritated expressions, mutters, and passive-aggressive sighs. People who had been quietly trying to ignore the crying now sat upright, shoulders tense, lips pursed. Every time Lucas adjusted Lily's position, every time she kicked or let out another shriek, someone's head would turn with a visible flinch. A businessman in 1B pinched the bridge of his nose and muttered, "Unbelievable." A young woman in 3A pulled her eye mask down dramatically, as if to signal to everyone how impossible it was to sleep under these conditions. Even the couple in 4D and 4E, who had been cooing at the baby earlier before takeoff, now exchanged annoyed looks and stopped smiling. The cabin felt heavier, tighter, as if the collective mood of the passengers had dropped several degrees. One man from business class peeked past the curtain, craning his neck to see what was happening. "Is something wrong with the baby?" he asked from the flight attendants. His voice was polite, but there was an edge to it, the kind of tone that said, "Fix this, because we paid good money for this flight." The flight attendant, still trying to keep her professional smile, simply replied, "The father is doing his best, sir. We appreciate your patience." But patience was quickly running out. A group of college students in economy started whispering to each other, giggling softly. One of them pulled out his phone and pretended to record, mouthing viral content to his friend. They weren't cruel, not exactly, but they were treating Lucas's struggle like a source of entertainment. Lucas could feel the judgment, like a physical weight pressing on him. He wasn't just imagining it. People were annoyed. People were angry. He had been in tense situations before. He had faced aggressive investors, angry shareholders, and entire rooms full of reporters asking hostile questions. But this was worse. This was personal. Every glance felt like a verdict. You should have stayed home. You should know how to control your own child. Money can't buy you basic parenting skills. Lucas clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He refused to snap at anyone. He refused to let anger show on his face. But inside, guilt twisted in his chest. He knew they didn't see the full picture. They didn't know that this was Lily's first long-haul flight, that she had barely slept the night before, that her whole world had been turned upside down when her mother died. They didn't know that Lucas had sat awake for hours a night before packing every toy, every blanket, every bottle he thought she might need, determined to make this trip as smooth as possible. They didn't know how hard he was trying. Another cry ripped through the cabin, sharper and louder than before. Lucas saw a woman in 2D jump slightly, as though startled. She turned around, glaring, and said loudly enough for half the cabin to hear, "This is getting ridiculous." Lucas swallowed hard. He wanted to apologize to her, to everyone, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he even say? Sorry my daughter is a baby? The flight attendants tried to diffuse the tension by offering drinks earlier than scheduled. They smiled warmly, passing champagne and orange juice around, hoping to calm nerves. Some passengers accepted. Others waved them away, too annoyed to bother. A man a few rows back raised his voice. "Hey, can you at least take the baby to the back of the plane? Some of us are trying to work up here." That one stung. Lucas's head shot up, his protective instinct sparking. He wanted to snap back, to remind the man that this was an airline cabin, not a private office, that his daughter had as much right to be here as anyone else. But before he could respond, one of the flight attendants stepped in. "Sir," she said firmly, "we cannot ask a parent to remove their child from their seat. We are doing everything we can." The man threw his hands up, muttering something about customer service, and sat back down, still glaring. The cabin was now divided. Some passengers were openly annoyed, others were sympathetic, whispering things like, "Poor man, he must be overwhelmed," or "That baby sounds like she's in pain." But for Lucas, all the voices blended together, forming one loud chorus of pressure. His mind started racing. What if Lily was sick? What if something was wrong with her ears? What if she was crying because she was in pain and he hadn't figured it out yet? He ran through every parenting article he had read in the last few months, trying to recall tips for calming a baby during flights. Offer a pacifier. Bounce gently. Distract with toys. Check diaper. He had done all of that already. Nothing worked. The minutes felt like hours. Every time the baby's cries slowed, Lucas would hold his breath, praying for silence. And every time they started again, he felt his heart sink. He could feel sweat on his palms. His back ached. He adjusted his grip on Lily, bouncing her gently, whispering soothing words. "You're okay, sweetheart," he murmured, kissing her temple. "Daddy's here. Daddy's not going anywhere." Somewhere deep down, Lucas wished someone, anyone, would step in and save him from this moment. But who? The flight attendants had already done what they could. The other passengers clearly wanted nothing to do with the situation, except for it to stop. Lucas felt alone, even though he was surrounded by people. Alone in his first-class seat. Alone with the cries that wouldn't end. It was then, as he looked around the cabin desperately for a miracle, that he saw her. A quiet woman, sitting near the back of the plane. She wasn't glaring. She wasn't sighing or rolling her eyes. She was just watching, her face calm, her eyes full of something Lucas hadn't seen from anyone else on this flight. Empathy. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Lucas quickly looked away, embarrassed. He didn't want pity. He didn't want anyone to think he couldn't handle his own child. But deep down, something in him hoped she might come forward anyway. Because if things kept going like this, Lucas wasn't sure how much longer he could hold himself together. Naomi sat in seat 32C, near the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had been quiet since the moment she boarded the plane, speaking only to say thank you when the flight attendant offered her water. She wasn't the kind of person who drew attention to herself. In fact, Naomi had perfected the art of going unnoticed. She wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back into a low bun. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would make her stand out. But her eyes were different. Her eyes were warm, thoughtful, the kind of eyes that noticed everything. She had noticed the baby's cries from the moment they began. At first, she assumed it would stop after takeoff. Babies cried on planes all the time, and usually the sound faded within minutes. But this baby hadn't stopped. Naomi watched as flight attendants walked back and forth, watched as passengers exchanged irritated glances, watched as the man in first class, the one who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, tried everything he could to calm his child. She could see how tired he was, how desperately he rocked the baby, whispering something into her ear. Even from this far back, Naomi could sense the heaviness in his shoulders. Naomi's heart ached. She had always been sensitive to the sound of a baby crying. Maybe it was because she had grown up helping her mother raise 5 younger siblings in a small house that was always full of noise. She had spent half her childhood rocking crying babies, humming lullabies, and learning how to calm a fussy infant. Her mother used to say Naomi had magic hands. "The way you hold a baby, Naomi," her mom would say, smiling proudly. "It's like they can feel how calm you are. That's why they trust you." Naomi had believed her mother back then, but that was years ago. Now, Naomi was far from home, traveling to a city where no one knew her. She had saved for months to buy this ticket, her first flight ever, to start a new job abroad. The last thing she wanted was to cause trouble or draw attention to herself. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, biting her lip as another wave of crying echoed through the cabin. Part of her wanted to stay put. It wasn't her problem. There were trained flight attendants and a wealthy father in first class who surely had more resources than she did. Besides, what if she embarrassed herself? What if the man rejected her offer? Naomi was shy by nature, the kind of person who second-guessed everything she said. Even asking a stranger for the time sometimes made her anxious. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "Don't get involved," she told herself. "You'll just make things awkward." But then she heard something that changed her mind. Through the constant crying, she heard the faintest whisper. The father had leaned his forehead against his baby's head, whispering, "Please, just for a little while, please stop crying." It wasn't just a plea to the baby. It was the sound of a man breaking down, a man carrying far too much on his shoulders. Naomi's chest tightened. She couldn't sit here anymore, doing nothing. Her mother's voice came back to her, soft but clear. "When you see someone hurting, Naomi, don't wait for someone else to help. Sometimes you're the answer to someone's prayer." Naomi took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding. She didn't know if this was the right thing to do. She didn't know if anyone would even take her seriously. But she unbuckled her seatbelt anyway. As she stood, the passengers near her turned to look. A few raised their eyebrows, curious. Naomi could feel their eyes on her, and for a moment, she almost sat back down. But then the baby cried again, louder this time, and that was enough to keep her moving. Naomi walked slowly up the aisle, her hands trembling slightly. She could hear her own heartbeat over the hum of the engines. The walk to first class felt much longer than it really was. As she passed row after row of passengers, some gave her questioning looks, as if wondering what she was doing. Others didn't notice at all, too busy scrolling on their phones or staring at the seatback screens. Finally, Naomi reached the curtain separating economy from first class. She hesitated for just a moment before gently pulling aside. There he was, the billionaire father. Up close, he looked even more exhausted than she had thought. His shirt was rumpled, his hair slightly messy. His arms were wrapped around the crying baby, bouncing her gently, his face lined with worry. Naomi's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to speak. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man looked up, surprised. His blue-gray eyes met hers, and for a second, Naomi forgot what she was going to say. I think I might be able to help, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. The flight attendants glanced at each other, surprised but curious. One of them stepped aside, allowing Naomi closer. The billionaire looked at her, hesitant. She could see the caution in his eyes. He didn't know her. She was just a stranger from economy class. But Naomi didn't look away. She didn't try to impress him. She simply stood there, calm and steady, her hands open and empty. I used to take care of babies all the time back home, she said softly. I think I know what she needs. For a moment, the man just stared at her, as if weighing his options. He had already tried everything he could think of. The crew had tried too. And yet, here was this quiet, shy woman, offering help when no one else had. Something in Naomi's tone, gentle, certain, made him trust her. He nodded slowly and said, "Please." And with that single word, everything began to change. Naomi stood there, heart hammering in her chest. The cabin felt heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the passengers who'd been whispering moments before went silent, their curiosity piqued by the sight of this shy young woman daring to step into the most uncomfortable spotlight. Lucas blinked at her, exhaustion written all over his face. He had seen pitying glances, annoyed glares, even impatient complaints during the last hour. But he hadn't seen this. Naomi's expression wasn't judgmental, nor was it condescending. It was calm, gentle. She looked like someone who genuinely cared, and that threw him off guard. Naomi could feel dozens of eyes on her. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but she forced herself to stand tall. She could almost hear her own mother whisper in her ear again, "Don't doubt the gifts God gave you, Naomi. Sometimes the world needs exactly what you carry." Her hands trembled slightly, so she clasped them together to steady herself. She swallowed hard and spoke again, a little louder this time. "I think," she hesitated, her voice soft but steady, "I think I might be able to help." The words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. For a second, Lucas didn't respond. His protective instincts kicked in immediately. This was his daughter. Handing her to a complete stranger? On an airplane, no less? His mind flashed through every possible worst-case scenario. What if this woman made things worse? What if Lily cried harder? What if the passengers grew even more impatient? But then, he looked at her again. There was something in Naomi's eyes, a quiet certainty, the kind of assurance that doesn't come from arrogance but from lived experience. He could tell she wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't there for attention. She was there because she genuinely wanted to help. The baby screamed again, cutting through his hesitation. Lucas rubbed his temple, feeling torn between fear and desperation. He had nothing left to try. And right now, this stranger's offer felt like the only lifeline in sight. Naomi took a small step forward, her palms open in a non-threatening gesture. "May I?" she asked softly. The flight attendants exchanged quick glances. They, too, were unsure, but something about Naomi's demeanor put them at ease. One of them gave Lucas a slight nod, silently encouraging him to at least consider it. Lucas looked down at his daughter. Her little fists were clenched, her cheeks red from crying, her tiny chest rising and falling with each sob. His heart broke seeing her like this. She needed peace, comfort, something he wasn't able to give her in this moment. He let out a long, shaky breath. "All right," he whispered. Carefully, almost reluctantly, he shifted Lily into Naomi's arms. The cabin seemed to tighten with tension. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, curious to see what would happen next. Even those who had been frustrated moments ago now found themselves strangely invested, as if watching a scene unfold in a movie. Naomi cradled the baby with practiced ease, her movements instinctive and gentle. She positioned Lily against her chest, one hand supporting the baby's head, the other patting her back in a slow, rhythmic pattern. "Hi there, little one," Naomi whispered softly, almost as though she and the baby were the only two people in the world. Her voice was low, melodic, carrying a tone that immediately sounded different from the frantic shushing that had filled the cabin before. She began to hum. It wasn't a song anyone recognized, just a simple, lilting melody, the kind that might have been passed down through generations, hummed by mothers and grandmothers in quiet rooms. The tune was steady, soothing, almost hypnotic. At first, Lily continued to cry. Her little body trembled with hiccuping sobs. Naomi didn't flinch. She just kept rocking, humming, and patting with that steady rhythm, her own heartbeat slowing as she focused on projecting calm. Lucas watched in silence, his throat tight. He had never seen anyone hold his daughter like this except Anna. And for the first time in hours, maybe even days, he felt a flicker of hope. The minutes stretched on. Passengers leaned closer, whispering to each other. Some of the earlier tension had shifted into anticipation. Could this quiet, shy woman really succeed where everyone else had failed? Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum vibrate through her chest, so the baby could feel it. She adjusted her hold slightly, swaying in small, fluid motions that mimicked the rhythm of a heartbeat. And then, slowly, the cries began to fade. It started with a hitch, the baby's scream breaking into a softer whimper. Then another hiccup, followed by a quieter sob. Naomi's humming never wavered. She swayed gently, her eyes opening just enough to glance at the baby's face. Lily's eyes fluttered, her fists unclenched, her cries dissolved into tiny, uneven breaths. And then silence. The baby exhaled deeply, resting her tiny head against Naomi's chest, her eyelids drooping shut. Within moments, she was asleep. The entire cabin froze. For the first time since takeoff, the plane was quiet. The cries that had seemed endless, unbearable, were gone. Passengers exchanged stunned glances, mouths slightly open. One man whispered, "No way." Another passenger, the woman who had been glaring earlier, leaned back in her seat with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. The flight attendant stared in astonishment. One of them covered her mouth with her hand, whispering, "That's incredible." Lucas sat back slowly, his body slack with relief. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His daughter, his restless, inconsolable daughter, was finally at peace, and all it had taken was this shy stranger's touch. He looked at Naomi, truly looking at her for the first time. She seemed almost unaware of the attention around her, her focus entirely on the baby in her arms. She wasn't smiling triumphantly. She wasn't basking in the amazement of the crowd. She just looked calm, content, as though holding a baby this way was the most natural thing in the world to her. Lucas felt his chest tighten. Whoever this woman was, she had just done the impossible. The murmurs of the passengers grew into something else. Soft clapping, then louder applause. A ripple of relief and admiration spread through the cabin. People who had been frustrated moments ago now smiled, shaking their heads in disbelief. Naomi's cheeks flushed. She hadn't wanted attention. She had only wanted to help. But now, here she was, standing in the center of first class with every eye on her. Still, she didn't let it distract her. She kept humming softly, her hand steady, ensuring Lily remained asleep. Lucas leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you do that?" Naomi glanced at him, her expression shy but warm. "Sometimes babies just need a rhythm," she said softly. "They need to feel that calm energy. My mom taught me that." Lucas nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He hadn't felt this kind of gratitude in years. Raw, overwhelming, humbling gratitude. For the first time since boarding, he let himself exhale fully. His shoulders dropped, his body loosening from the tight coil it had been in for hours. His daughter was safe. His daughter was calm. And it was because this shy woman had been brave enough to step forward when no one else had. The airplane cabin, once filled with the piercing cries of a restless infant, now sat under a blanket of silence, so profound it felt almost holy. Naomi rocked Lily gently, her humming fading into a soft, wordless tune that vibrated more in her chest than in her throat. The baby's tiny breaths came steady and even, her little hand curled loosely against Naomi's blouse. It was as if the storm had passed. But the change wasn't only in the child. The air itself seemed to shift. Passengers who had been fidgeting in their seats, tugging at headphones, rolling their eyes in exasperation, were now leaning back with visible relief. Some smiled, others exchanged nods of disbelief. A few even chuckled under their breath. Not in mockery this time, but in sheer amazement at what they had just witnessed. For nearly 2 hours, the cries of an invisible weight pressing down on every passenger's nerves. Now, with the baby calm, the entire cabin felt lighter, as if everyone had been released from a collective tension they hadn't realized they were all carrying. Lucas sat there, stunned. His chest rose and fell heavily, the adrenaline of the past hour still lingering in his veins. His mind couldn't quite process what had just happened. He had tried everything, absolutely everything, and yet nothing had worked. And then this woman, this quiet, shy woman who looked like she'd rather hide in her seat than speak up, had stepped forward, taken his child, and done the impossible. His eyes didn't leave Naomi. She swayed slightly, her motion so natural it was as if she'd been doing this her whole life. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't even really aware of the audience around her. She was fully present with Lily, her face serene, her body tuned to the baby's needs. Lucas swallowed hard. He felt humbled. He was a billionaire, a man who built empires, who negotiated deals worth millions, who was accustomed to being the one with solutions. But here he was, utterly powerless in the face of his daughter's tears, saved not by wealth, not by influence, but by the quiet grace of a stranger. "Excuse me," a voice whispered nearby. Naomi glanced up to see one of the flight attendants, her eyes wide with admiration. That was amazing. "Truly, would you like me to bring you some water?" Naomi gave a small, polite nod. "Thank you," she whispered back, careful not to disturb Lily's sleep. The attendant disappeared, and Naomi turned her attention back to the baby, stroking Lily's fine hair with the gentlest touch. She could feel the weight of stares from passengers, but she tried to block them out. She hadn't done this for recognition. She'd done it because the sight of a baby in distress, and a father at his breaking point, had stirred something deep within her. Lucas leaned forward, his voice low, almost reverent. "I don't even know what to say." Naomi looked at him shyly, her cheeks warming. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured. But he shook his head. "No, I do. You don't understand. She—" He stopped, his voice faltering as his gaze dropped his daughter. "She's everything. And I've been so scared I'm not enough for her." Naomi's heart softened at his words. She could hear the vulnerability beneath them, the weight of responsibility he carried. To everyone else on this plane, Lucas might look like a man of power, sitting in a first-class seat, traveling with privilege. But Naomi saw something else, a father who was just trying to hold himself together, terrified of failing the one person who mattered most. "You're enough," Naomi said quietly. "You're here. You're trying. That's what she'll remember." Lucas stared at her, caught off guard by the simplicity, yet depth of her words. No one had told him that before. Most people praised his wealth, his business acumen, his success. But here was this woman telling him that simply being there for his daughter mattered more than anything. He blinked, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed himself to believe it. The applause that had rippled through the cabin moments earlier began to fade, replaced by a quieter kind of reverence. People weren't just impressed by Naomi. They were moved. Some passengers, parents themselves, wore expressions that said they understood the depth of what had just happened. Others, who had been annoyed or impatient, now seemed humbled, reminded that behind every crying baby was a story, a struggle that demanded compassion, not judgment. The older woman who had earlier complained leaned forward slightly, catching Naomi's eye. "You've got a gift, dear," she said softly, her voice stripped of irritation. "Don't ever doubt that." Naomi flushed, murmuring a quick, "Thank you." Compliments always made her uneasy, but this one touched her differently. Maybe because it echoed what her mother had always told her, that her gentle spirit was not weakness, but strength. As the plane hummed along at cruising altitude, a new kind of peace settled in. People returned to their books, their conversations, their movies, but the energy in the cabin was transformed. The tension had given way to admiration, and Naomi, whether she liked it or not, had become the quiet hero of the flight. Lucas couldn't take his eyes off her. The way she held Lily wasn't just skilled. It was loving, genuine. as though she carried a well of tenderness that overflowed without effort. And it wasn't just a baby who had been soothed. Somehow, Naomi had soothed him too. He found himself leaning closer again, his voice low. Do you work with children? Naomi hesitated, then shook her head. No, I've just always been around them. My mom used to foster kids. I guess I learned a lot from helping her. Something in her tone made Lucas study her more deeply. There was humility there, but also a quiet pride. She wasn't bragging. She was sharing a piece of herself. Lucas nodded slowly. Well, whatever it is, you've just given me something I'll never forget. Naomi looked down, embarrassed, her arms tightening slightly around Lily. She hadn't expected gratitude. She hadn't expected anything, really. But hearing the sincerity in his voice, she felt something shift inside her too, a reminder that even small acts of kindness could ripple farther than she realized. The flight attendant returned with water, setting it gently on Naomi's tray. You really saved the day, she whispered with a smile. Naomi smiled faintly in return, but her focus never left Lily. The baby's tiny breaths were like music to her now, a sign that peace was possible even in the most chaotic moments. For Lucas, that peace felt like a miracle. His shoulders loosened, his breathing evened out, and for the first time since boarding, he allowed himself to relax into his seat. Watching Naomi cradle his daughter, he realized something profound. All his wealth, all his influence, had been powerless in this moment. What had saved him was something money couldn't buy. Compassion, patience, and the courage of a stranger. He whispered almost to himself, "Thank you." Naomi glanced at him, offering the smallest smile. "You're welcome." But inside, she wondered if perhaps she should be thanking him too, for trusting her, for giving her the chance to step out of her own shadows and use the gift she had often doubted. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for meal service, but in that small corner of first class, something far brighter had already unfolded. A quiet bond forming between two people from vastly different worlds, brought together by the cry of a child and the courage to act. Naomi adjusted her hold on Lily, feeling the baby snuggle closer. She didn't know what the rest of this flight would bring, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever quite be the same again. The hush of the cabin stretched on, fragile but comforting. For once, there was no crying, no restless shifting of passengers, no anxious glances toward the father with the inconsolable baby. Peace had settled in like a blanket, and at the center of it sat Naomi, cradling little Lily as though she were born for this moment. Lucas leaned forward slightly, still marveling at the sight. His daughter's tiny chest rose and fell against Naomi's shoulder, her face soft and serene in sleep. It was almost unbelievable. He had fought for 2 hours, desperate and overwhelmed, and then in a matter of minutes this woman, this stranger, had transformed chaos into calm. Lucas cleared his throat. His voice was low, as though afraid to disturb the balance. She's really out, isn't she?" Naomi nodded, her smile gentle. "Deep asleep. She's safe." Something in the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so assured, made Lucas's chest tighten. He hadn't felt safe all day, not really, not even for a second. But Naomi said it with such quiet certainty that he almost believed it wasn't just about the baby, but about him too. For a while, they sat in silence. Lucas didn't want to interrupt the fragile magic of the moment, but something tugged at him. Maybe it was exhaustion loosening the guard he always carried. Maybe it was the fact that Naomi wasn't staring at him like the billionaire. She wasn't awed by his name, his money, or the world that came with it. She was just present, and that presence felt like something he desperately needed. "I'm not very good at this," Lucas said finally, his voice raw. Naomi looked at him, her brows slightly furrowed. "At what?" "At being a dad." The confession slipped out before he could stop it. He chuckled bitterly, though there was no humor in it. "I mean, don't get me wrong. I love her more than anything. But I don't know what I'm doing most of the time." Naomi's gaze softened. No parent does. Not really. Lucas blinked, caught off guard. He expected pity or maybe a polite dismissal, but Naomi's tone was steady, kind, and certain. She continued, "I've seen so many parents doubt themselves. They think they're failing because it doesn't look perfect. But babies don't need perfect. They need love. And well, it's obvious she has that. Lucas's throat tightened. He glanced down at his sleeping daughter, then back at Naomi. You really think so? I know so, Naomi replied, her voice as sure as her hold on the child. Lucas let her words wash over him. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. He was used to people praising him for boardroom victories, strategic brilliance, the kind of success measured in stock prices and market growth. But no one praised him for the quiet, messy, sleepless work of fatherhood. No one told him he was enough. Until now, for a moment, he just stared at Naomi, wondering who she really was. She didn't talk like most people he met in first class. She didn't act like someone who was desperate for his attention or validation. Her words carried weight, not because of who she was speaking to, but because of what she had lived. Can I ask you something? Lucas said, his curiosity pushing past his usual reserve. Naomi hesitated, but nodded. You handle her like... He paused, searching for the right word. Like she's yours. Like you've done this 1,000 times. How? Naomi's lips curved into the faintest smile. She looked down at Lily, brushing a stray curl of hair from the baby's forehead before answering. I grew up in a house full of kids, she said softly. My mom was a foster parent. There were always babies in the house, toddlers running around, children needing someone to hold them when they cried. I guess I just learned. My mom taught me to pay attention, to listen, to be patient. Lucas leaned back slightly, absorbing her words. There was a story there, a big one, behind that simple explanation. So you had a big family? He asked. Naomi tilted her head. Not in the usual sense. I'm an only child. But my family grew every time a new child came through our door. Some stayed for weeks, some for years, some left and never came back. Her voice faltered just a little, and Lucas caught it. He could see there was pain tucked between her words, a story heavy with both love and loss. But Naomi didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he nodded slowly. That explains a lot. What do you mean? She asked. The way you just stepped in. The way you knew exactly what she needed. It's like second nature to you. Naomi's cheeks warmed. I just did what I've always seen work. Babies need rhythm, calm, and presence. That's what my mom used to say. If you can't fix the world, fix the moment. That's what I tried to do. Lucas smiled faintly, though his eyes glistened. Fix the moment. That's beautiful. Naomi shrugged, her expression shy. It's simple, but sometimes simple is what we forget. They both grew quiet again, the hum of the plane filling the space between them. Lucas studied her, struck by how different she was from most people he encountered in his world. There was no pretense with Naomi, no agenda. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't even trying to be noticed. And yet, here she was, holding the most precious person in his life, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm sorry, Lucas said suddenly, his voice dropping lower. Naomi looked up, surprised. Sorry? For what? For before. For snapping. For being defensive. You didn't deserve that. I was just... He ran a hand over his face, sighing. I was overwhelmed. Naomi shook her head gently. You don't need to apologize. You were protecting her. That's what parents do. Lucas swallowed hard, the truth of her words sinking deep. Protecting her. That was all he wanted to do, yet he often felt like he was failing. But Naomi said it like it mattered, like even the messy, imperfect effort counted as love. For the first time, Lucas felt a strange calm settle in him. This conversation wasn't like the ones he was used to. It wasn't about deals or strategies or appearances. It was raw, human, and in that rawness, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Understood. Most people don't see me like this, Lucas admitted quietly. Naomi tilted her head. Curious. Like what? Like a dad. They see the money, the headlines, the image. But not this. He gestured toward his daughter, sleeping peacefully in Naomi's arms. Not the nights I stay awake worrying if she's okay. Not the times I wonder if I'm enough. Not the moments like this where I'm falling apart and praying someone will understand. Naomi's eyes soften again, her voice steady. Well, I see it. I see a dad who loves his little girl enough to worry, enough to try, enough to care what people think of her cries. That's more than most kids ever get. Her words pierced through him, not like a knife, but like light breaking through heavy clouds. He blinked rapidly, trying to keep his emotions in check, but the lump in his throat was hard to ignore. "Thank you," he whispered. Naomi smiled faintly, her eyes dropping back to Lily. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep loving her the way you do. That's what matters." The plane continued its steady journey through the night, but for Lucas and Naomi, time seemed to slow. In that shared moment, a billionaire father and a shy young woman from a world far different than his, a fragile but undeniable bond was forming. The cabin was dim now. The overhead lights softened as the crew moved quietly down the aisles with meal trays. Somewhere near the back, a baby fussed briefly, then quieted again. But in first class, where Naomi sat with Lily still nestled in her arms, the world seemed hushed, like a fragile bubble of peace that no one dared disturb. Lucas had barely moved. He couldn't take his eyes off Naomi, still marveling at the way she had transformed his world in the space of an hour. The exhaustion hadn't disappeared, but something else had settled in its place. Awe. The applause from earlier had faded. Passengers had returned to their distractions, but Lucas wasn't ready to move on. He felt like there was more to this woman, something hidden beneath her quiet exterior, something that explained the calm, the patience, the way she carried herself as though she knew storms firsthand. "You said your mom was a foster parent," Lucas said after a long silence, his voice low, so as not to disturb Lily. "That must have been a lot." Naomi's gaze dropped to the sleeping baby, her fingers brushing over Lily's small curls. "It was," she admitted softly. "Our house was always full. Sometimes with laughter, sometimes with chaos. My mom, she believed every child deserved to feel safe, even if only for a little while." Lucas nodded, sensing there was more. He waited, giving her the space to continue if she wanted to. Naomi hesitated, her throat tightening. Sharing pieces of herself wasn't something she did easily. Most people didn't care to listen, and she had learned to keep her stories tucked close to her chest. But something about this moment felt different. Lucas wasn't looking at her like she was invisible. He was looking at her as though what she said mattered. "There was one girl," Naomi began quietly, her voice tinged with memory. "She was about 6 when she came to stay with us. Scared of everything. Wouldn't speak for weeks. She used to cry at night, so quietly you almost wouldn't hear it, but I did. I'd sit with her until she fell asleep. Sometimes I'd hum, like I did just now. Eventually, she started humming with me. It was the first sound she made in our house." Lucas's chest tightened. "Did she stay long?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "A few months. Then one day, she was gone. Social workers came, packed her things, and that was it. We never saw her again." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. That's how it was. Children came and went. Some healed, some carried their wounds with them. But every goodbye left a mark. Lucas's throat ached. He could hear the weight in her voice, the unspoken grief. She wasn't just someone who knew how to hold a baby. She was someone who had held brokenness over and over again and chosen to love anyway. "That must have been hard," he said gently. Naomi gave a small, sad smile. "It was, but it also taught me something. Love doesn't have to last forever to matter. Even if you only give it for a little while, it can change someone's life." Her words lingered, heavy yet beautiful. Lucas thought about Lily, about the fear that he might not be enough, about the loneliness he sometimes felt in his new role as a single father. Naomi's philosophy struck him deeply. Maybe he didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe just being present, even in the messy, imperfect ways, was enough to leave a lasting imprint on his daughter's heart. "You talk like someone who's lived more than most people twice your age," Lucas said softly. Naomi chuckled faintly, though there was no arrogance in her expression. Maybe I just learned to notice things most people overlook." When you grow up around children who've been through so much, you realize how much the little things matter. A steady hand, a gentle word, a lullaby in the middle of the night. They seem small, but to a child who's known fear, they're everything. Lucas studied her closely. And what about you? Did anyone do that for you? The question caught Naomi off guard. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. No one had ever asked her that so directly. My mom tried, she said finally, her voice quiet. She was strong, and she carried more weight than anyone should. But sometimes I felt invisible. The kid she fostered needed so much, and I didn't want to add to her burden. So I stayed quiet. I learned to help instead of needing help. Lucas felt a pang in his chest. He saw it now. The reason Naomi's presence carried such steadiness. She had trained herself, not because life was easy, but because she had learned to put others first, even at her own expense. That must have been lonely, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Naomi's smile was faint but real. Sometimes, but it also gave me purpose. I figure if I couldn't be the one needing, I could be the one giving. And maybe that's enough. For a long moment, Lucas couldn't speak. His gaze drifted to Lily. Her little face relaxed in Naomi's arms, then back to Naomi herself. He saw her in a new light now. Not just as a woman who had soothed his baby, but as someone who had spent her life carrying pieces of other people's pain while quietly bearing her own. And something about that stirred him. You're remarkable, Lucas said before he could stop himself. Naomi blinked, startled. I'm not. I just did what anyone would do. Lucas shook his head. No, most people wouldn't have stepped in. Most people wouldn't even have noticed. You did. And you didn't just notice, you acted. That takes courage. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes darting away. Compliments always made her uncomfortable, but something in his voice, the raw sincerity, made her chest tighten. The cabin crew rolled past with trays, offering meals. Lucas waved them off, not wanting to interrupt the moment. Naomi declined too, whispering that she didn't want to disturb Lily. The attendant gave them both a knowing smile before moving on. For a while, the two sat in companionable silence, the hum of the engines wrapping around them like background music. Lucas found himself studying Naomi in the quiet, the way she held herself, both strong and fragile, the way her eyes softened when she looked at Lily, the way her words carried the weight of someone who had seen pain, but refused to let it harden her. You know, Lucas said suddenly, his voice thoughtful, when she started crying, I thought the whole flight would hate us. And for a while, I think they did. I felt so small, powerless. But then you came along, and somehow you didn't just calm her. You changed the entire room. Everyone felt it. That's rare. Naomi shook her head softly. I didn't change the room. Lily did. Babies remind people what really matters. Sometimes we just forget to listen. Lucas considered her words, then smiled faintly. Maybe, but without you, none of us would have remembered tonight. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not just a tired father, but a man stripped of his armor, vulnerable, honest, human, and she realized in that moment that maybe they were more alike than she thought. Both carrying more than they let on, both quietly afraid of not being enough, both searching for something bigger than themselves. The engines roared softly as the plane cut to the night sky, but in their small corner of first class, the world felt still. Two strangers, one baby, and a growing awareness that this flight was about more than just getting from one city to another. It was about connection, healing. The soft from the plane had lulled much of first class into a drowsy calm. Passengers leaned back, some with their masks pulled down, others quietly scrolling their screens or sipping wine. The overhead lights were dim now, painting the cabin in a muted glow. Naomi shifted slightly in her seat, careful not to disturb Lily, who was still asleep against her shoulder. The baby's tiny breaths came in steady rhythms. Her small hand curled loosely around Naomi's blouse. Lucas, sitting close beside them, had gone quiet. His eyes weren't closed, but they carried the kind of stillness that suggested he was lost in thought. For the first time all flight, Lucas felt something close to peace. His body remained heavy with exhaustion, But his mind, usually clouded by constant worry, had found an anchor in Naomi's presence. Watching her cradle Lily stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, but peace, as it so often does, proved fleeting. A low rumble suddenly vibrated through the plane, subtle at first, then sharper. The seatbelt light blinked back on overhead with a ding. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. We're expecting some turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts." Almost immediately, the aircraft shuddered. Drinks rattled in cup holders, and a few passengers sat straighter, glancing nervously toward the windows. Lucas instinctively reached for Lily, but Naomi's grip was already steady, her body curled protectively around the baby. "I've got her," she whispered, her voice calm, though her eyes flickered with alertness. The turbulence worsened. The plane jolted sharply, earning a startled gasp from a passenger across the aisle. Someone farther back let out a nervous laugh, the kind that wasn't really funny at all. Lily stirred at the sudden motion, her little body shifting uneasily. A soft whimper escaped her lips. Naomi's hand began to rub slow circles on the baby's back, murmuring low reassurances, but Lily's whimpers grew louder, fear rising in her tiny chest. Lucas tightened his seatbelt, his jaw clenched. "She hates this," he muttered, panic edging into his voice. "She can feel it." Naomi leaned closer to shield Lily, humming softly, but another violent jolt shook the plane. Luggage shifted in overhead bins, and a woman across the row clutched her partner's hand tightly. And just like that, Lily began to cry. The sound was piercing against the backdrop of shaking metal and engine noise, a wail born not of hunger or tiredness this time, but of pure fear. Her little arms flailed, her face scrunched up red as she screamed. Lucas's heart plummeted. Every instinct screamed at him to fix it, to protect her, but his hands trembled as he reached out helplessly. "She's terrified. What if she can't calm down?" Naomi didn't flinch. She drew Lily tighter against her chest, rocking gently despite the bumps. "Shush, sweetheart," she cooed, her voice steady, almost defiant against the chaos. I know. It's scary, but you're safe." Her humming started again, though it quivered slightly with the movement of the plane. Lucas watched, his chest constricting. He wanted to believe in Naomi's calm, but the fear in his own chest was nearly overwhelming. The plane lurched hard to one side, and a chorus of gas erupted from the cabin. Someone whispered, "Oh, God!" Another voice prayed under their breath. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second, whispering words that Lucas barely caught. "Hold steady, Lord." Then she looked down at Lily again, forcing her voice into the gentlest melody. Gradually, unbelievably, the baby's cries softened. Not immediately, not perfectly, but enough. The sobs broke into hiccups, the screams into soft whimpers. Lily's face pressed into Naomi's chest as though burrowing into the only safe place left in the world. Passengers who had been too distracted by their own nerves now glanced over again, this time with wide-eyed amazement. Even in the middle of shaking metal and rattling trays, the baby who had wailed minutes before was now clinging to quiet. Lucas exhaled shakily, his hand gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. His eyes locked on Naomi, her expression serene, though beads of sweat dotted her temple. She was afraid, too, he realized. Anyone would be, but she was refusing to let it show. For Lily's sake. "You're incredible," he breathed, his voice hoarse. Naomi didn't answer. She only kept humming, her cheek pressed lightly against the baby's curls. The turbulence stretched on, a brutal test of nerves. Every dip and jolt threatened to undo the fragile calm. Lucas leaned slightly toward Naomi, his hand hovering near her arm. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Let me help." For the briefest moment, Naomi turned to look at him. Her eyes were filled with something unreadable, part gratitude, part disbelief, part vulnerability she usually kept buried. She didn't say anything, but she allowed him to adjust the blanket over Lily's tiny body, tucking it snug around her legs. It was a small gesture, but to Lucas it felt monumental, like she was letting him into her fortress, even if just an inch. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the turbulence eased. The plane steadied, the violent shake subsiding into a gentler rocking motion. A collective exhale rippled through the cabin, passengers sagging back into their seats. The captain's voice returned, calm and steady. Apologies for that, folks. We've cleared the rough patch. You may remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. A nervous chuckle rose somewhere behind them. Someone clapped lightly, and a few others joined in the odd, weary applause of people relieved to still be airborne. Naomi opened her eyes, finally let her shoulders relax a fraction. Lily was already drifting back into a drowsy state, her tiny fist still clutching Naomi's blouse, as though unwilling to let go. Lucas sat back, his chest heaving with a long breath. He turned to Naomi, his eyes full of something that hadn't been there before, not just awe, but something deeper. Respect, connection, a sense that in this storm, they had not only survived, but leaned on each other in ways neither expected. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not just for her. For me, too." Naomi blinked, startled. "For you?" Lucas nodded. "I was falling apart. I didn't want Lily to feel it, but she did." "You!" he broke off, shaking his head in wonder. "You carried us both." Naomi's lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever said something like that to her. People usually praise her for being helpful or good with kids, but never for something so raw, so soul deep. Her chest tightened, her eyes stinging. She looked away, whispering, "I didn't do anything special. I just held on." Lucas studied her for a long moment. Sometimes holding on is the most special thing anyone can do. The words hung between them, charged with a quiet intensity neither of them fully understood yet. Naomi glanced back at him, her face soft, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. For a fleeting second, their eyes locked, and in that silent exchange, both felt it. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about a baby anymore. This was about two lives colliding in the middle of a storm, finding strength not in themselves, but in each other. As the engines purred steadily and the cabin began to calm once more, Naomi lowered her gaze back to Lily. But her thoughts weren't only on the child anymore. They were on the man beside her, and the terrifying, exhilarating realization that maybe, just maybe, their stories weren't meant to stay separate after this flight. The cabin lights brightened slowly, like dawn breaking through clouds. An announcement echoed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts, return your tray tables to their upright positions, and prepare for landing in New York. Local time is 7:15 a.m., and the weather is clear." For most passengers, the words were a relief. For Naomi, they carried a bittersweet weight. She looked down at Lily, who was now sleeping soundly in her arms, her little face serene as though the turbulence had never happened. Naomi's heart swelled at the sight, but beneath that warmth was another thought. Soon, this would end. Soon, she would hand Lily back to her father, gather her bag, and step off the plane. Just another stranger passing through someone else's story. Lucas stretched slightly in his seat, his eyes soft but weary. He glanced at Naomi, then at Lily and back again. Something unspoken passed through his gaze, something Naomi felt but didn't know how to name. "You've been beyond incredible," Lucas said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "I don't think I can ever thank you enough." Naomi shook her head, forcing a gentle smile. "You don't have to. Lily just needed comfort. Anyone would have done the same." Lucas leaned closer, his eyes holding hers. "No, not anyone. You." Naomi's throat tightened. She looked away quickly, focusing on tucking the blanket closer around Lily. Compliments always made her uncomfortable, but from Lucas, they felt different. He wasn't flattering her. He was speaking from a place of raw truth. The plane began to descend through the clouds, the faint rumble of landing gear echoing beneath them. Naomi's fingers stroked Lily's tiny hand, savoring the last moments of closeness. She thought about her life, the quiet apartment waiting for her, the stacks of books she buried herself in, the walls she'd built to keep people at a distance. And she thought about this flight, this child, this man. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Lucas cleared his throat softly. "Naomi," he hesitated, as though unsure how to bridge the silence. "Do you live in New York?" Naomi glanced at him, startled. Yes, Brooklyn. A faint smile tugged at his lips. I'm based in Manhattan. My offices are there. And, well, Lily and I live there now, too. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Naomi shifted, her voice cautious. Why do you ask? Lucas let out a nervous laugh, a sound she hadn't expected from a billionaire who usually exuded control. Because I don't want this to end when the wheels touch the ground. Naomi's heart skipped. She blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. You don't? No. Lucas said firmly, his gaze steady now. You walked into my life at 30,000 feet when I was falling apart, and you gave me something I didn't know I needed. You gave Lily peace. You gave me hope. That's not something I can just walk away from. Naomi's breath caught. She wanted to protest, to remind him that this was just a chance encounter, but the look in his eyes silenced her. He wasn't speaking out of obligation or gratitude. He meant it. Before she could respond, the plane jolted gently as the wheels touched down. The screech of rubber on asphalt filled the cabin, followed by a collective sigh of relief. They had landed. Applause broke out among the passengers, the weary, grateful kind that always followed a long, difficult flight. Naomi felt Lily stir in her arms at the noise, blinking drowsily, then nestling back against her. The seatbelt light clicked off. Passengers stood, stretching, gathering bags, already shifting back into their busy lives. The bubble of intimacy the three of them had shared felt fragile, threatened by the reality waiting outside. Naomi reluctantly looked at Lucas, her heart conflicted. She had lived her life avoiding attachments, keeping her world small and safe. Letting him in felt dangerous. But when Lily's little hand clutched her blouse one last time, Naomi felt her resolve crumble. She smiled faintly, brushing a kiss against the baby's forehead before gently transferring her into Lucas's arms. There you go, sweetheart, she whispered. Lily blinked up at her with wide, sleepy eyes, then reached a tiny hand toward Naomi's face as though refusing to let her go. The simple gesture nearly undid her. Lucas held Lily securely, but his gaze remained on Naomi. Don't disappear on us, he said softly. Please. Naomi hesitated, her heart racing. She could walk away now, slip back into the shadows of her quiet life. That had always been her pattern. But something about this moment, this man, this child, it tugged at her differently. She drew a shaky breath. I don't usually... Her voice trailed off. Lucas leaned closer, his tone gentle but insistent. Then maybe this time, don't do what you usually do. For a long moment, Naomi said nothing. She simply stared at him, her walls trembling. Then, slowly, she nodded. The line of passengers shuffled forward, filing out of the plane. Lucas adjusted Lily on his shoulder, then turned back to Naomi. Come with us, he said softly, at least until baggage claim. After that, we'll see. Naomi's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Baggage claim, huh? That's your big invitation? Lucas grinned, the first genuine grin she'd seen from him all night. It's a start. And somehow that was enough. They walked off the plane together, Naomi at his side, Lily nestled between them. The fluorescent lights of the terminal fell harsh after the dim intimacy of the cabin, but Naomi didn't shy away this time. People stared at Lucas, at his wealth, at the image of a billionaire carrying his baby. But Naomi noticed none of it. Her eyes stayed on Lily, then on the man beside her. At baggage claim, Lucas turned to her again, his expression hesitant but hopeful. Naomi, I don't know what your life looks like. I don't even know what mine is supposed to look like right now. But I know one thing. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. I don't want this, us, to be just a flight story. Naomi's chest tightened. For years, she had told herself she didn't need more, that her life was fine as it was. But here, now, with Lucas and Lily, she felt a glimpse of something she hadn't dared hope for. Belonging. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Lucas's eyes softened, his relief almost palpable. He reached out, not boldly, but gently, offering his hand. Naomi hesitated only a second before placing hers in his. And in that simple gesture, surrounded by the chaos of luggage carts and tired travelers, Something extraordinary began. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Not yet. Life would still be messy, complicated, uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt ready to step into the unknown. Because sometimes, miracles don't happen in cathedrals or grand moments. Sometimes they happen 30,000 feet in the air, with a crying baby, a broken father, and a shy woman brave enough to hum a lullaby in the dark. And sometimes those miracles don't end when the plane lands.